We are now living in the age of the Dharma's decline. The true teachings of the Buddha are gradually being overshadowed and receiving less attention, while countless heterodox cults and misleading spiritual movements continue to emerge and spread. As a result, people's already deluded minds become even more confused and misguided. These cults exploit people's desires and attachments, using them as bait. In the end, countless victims are left emotionally devastated, mentally manipulated, financially ruined, and physically exhausted. Families are torn apart, and society itself becomes increasingly unstable. Their methods often follow the strategy of offering a small bait to catch a much larger prize. They first satisfy a few of their followers' wishes to gain trust, then gradually seize control of the victims' bodies, minds, and wealth. They also rely heavily on vague but frightening threats designed to overwhelm people's judgment. Filled with fear and uncertainty, victims lose the clarity needed to distinguish right from wrong and eventually obey whatever they are told. T experienced exactly such a tragedy. Her full name is NTT, 31 years old, currently living in DH Ward, LC District, HP City. Not only she herself, but both sides of her extended family, from elderly grandparents to young children, have suffered tremendously because of what followed. Although Trang was already in her 30s, she remained rather innocent and inexperienced. Apart from studying and living a sheltered life, she had rarely faced the hardships and complexities of society. This lack of life experience prevented her from recognizing the many traps and dangers lying in wait, ready to prey upon trusting and unsuspecting people like herself. After dating a divorced man who was 10 years older than she was, T decided to marry him. Like many women, she dreamed of building a peaceful and happy family. She believed that selecting an auspicious wedding date would influence the harmony of her marriage. A close friend recommended that she visit a female spirit medium to choose a favorable wedding date. Trusting the recommendation, T and her fiancé traveled together to seek the medium's guidance. Fixing them with an almost hypnotic gaze, the medium slowly said, "You once caused the abortion of a baby boy. His spirit has been following you ever since. He was the one who destroyed your previous marriage, which is why you and your former wife eventually divorced." Hearing this, T's fiancé became deeply unsettled. Although he could not clearly remember anything matching the accusation, he nevertheless nodded, seemingly convinced by the medium's words. The medium continued, "Both of you should sincerely perform a small ritual, not elaborate, just heartfelt, to give the child a name and comfort his spirit. Only then will your future marriage be harmonious." As arranged, T and her fiancé returned for a second visit to perform the naming ceremony for this mysterious child, whose identity neither of them actually knew. During the ritual, the medium suddenly announced that the child's spirit wished to return to the place where T's fiancé had supposedly once had the baby. The truth was that he had no memory whatsoever of such a child. He did not know when it had happened, with whom, or where. Sensing his confusion, the medium adopted an air of mystery. She placed one hand against her forehead, gently brushed back a strand of hair, and calmly reassured the couple, "Don't worry. There's a way. Let the child cling to his father's shoulder." As she spoke, the young medium swiftly dipped her finger into an unknown liquid and touched both the man's forehead and wrist before he had any chance to react. The action happened so quickly that he instinctively accepted it without question. After that day, life appeared completely normal. Nothing seemed unusual. At the time, T was happily enjoying what she believed was the beginning of a loving marriage. She thought she had finally found her lifelong partner. Little did she know that a series of tragedies had already begun, starting from seemingly insignificant incidents that gradually escalated until, before she realized it, her family was falling apart. On their third visit, the couple returned to officially choose an auspicious wedding date. That day was July 31, 2020, the fateful day that would lead T's life down a dark and unexpected path. From that moment onward, one strange and disturbing event after another began haunting not only T but her entire extended family, leaving them unable to enjoy even a single day of genuine peace. T had always been honest, trusting, and devoted to her husband. Yet, almost overnight, he underwent a dramatic transformation. Once a loving and attentive man, he suddenly became distant, indifferent, and distrustful, not only toward T but also toward everyone in the family. It was as though he had changed by the wave of a magic wand. Even more puzzling was the fact that whenever any issue arose, large or small, he would immediately seek out the spirit medium for advice and follow her instructions without question. After the wedding, T became pregnant. As her due date approached, her husband, out of habit, hurried once again to the medium's shrine to ask whether the delivery would be safe. The medium sat cross-legged in the center of the shrine, her face solemn as she silently observed the couple. After a long pause, she slowly shook her head and said to T's husband, "If you want the childbirth to go smoothly, you must first settle a debt owed to the spirit world. The two of you should go to TR Temple in BG province and perform a ritual. It will cost around 40 million dong, and everything will be fine." Without the slightest hesitation, T's husband accepted her words as truth. He returned home, gathered the money, and traveled there to perform the expensive ceremony under the medium's direction. Strangely, after completing that ritual, he grew increasingly distant from his wife. He avoided not only T but also both sides of the extended family. The situation became even more painful after T gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Instead of caring for his wife and newborn daughter, he neglected them almost completely, constantly looking for excuses to stay away. T could not understand why someone who had once loved her so deeply had changed so suddenly. Childbirth had already left her physically weak and emotionally vulnerable. Being abandoned by her husband during such a difficult time was almost more than she could bear. Yet the strange incidents did not stop, they became increasingly severe. 1 month after giving birth, T developed a painful breast abscess caused by blocked milk ducts and required surgery. She underwent 2 operations, enduring tremendous physical suffering while also carrying the emotional burden of facing everything alone. Throughout this ordeal, her husband scarcely cared for either her or their baby. He left them hungry, ignored the baby's cries, and paid little attention to his wife's pain. To him, it seemed as though his own wife and daughter were no more important than strangers. Whenever he visited the hospital, he appeared like a man without a soul. T often felt that it would have hurt less if he had not come at all. After she returned home, his behavior remained unchanged. He constantly tried to drive T and the baby away or insisted on living separately. Under such circumstances, T often felt as though she were losing her mind. Nevertheless, for the sake of her tiny infant, who still depended entirely on her protection and care, she forced herself to endure. Night after night she lay awake asking herself what she had done wrong. She had always treated her husband with kindness and cared wholeheartedly for both him and the family. Yet he rejected her as though he desperately wanted to rid himself of both mother and child. The entire situation seemed utterly inexplicable. 3 months passed. As T gradually recovered and her daughter became stronger, she finally began investigating the true reason behind her husband's bizarre behavior, which seemed as though he were being manipulated by some unseen force. Carefully reviewing everything that had happened, she suddenly realized something startling. It all appeared to have begun on the day they visited the medium to perform the naming ritual for the mysterious child. T became convinced that during that ceremony, the medium had secretly placed a spiritual curse upon her husband, using what she believed were mbin, spirits or supernatural entities believed in folk tradition, to influence him and continually draw him back under her control. An even more shocking realization followed. Trang came to believe that during the later ceremony, where they had spent tens of millions of dong, the medium had developed romantic feelings for her husband. Out of jealousy, she allegedly used occult practices to sow discord within T's family and gradually tear their marriage apart. According to T's observations, after this, her husband suddenly developed an unusual fear of sunlight and bright places. He rarely wanted to leave the house, avoided crowds, and preferred hiding away in secluded places. His eyes often appeared unnaturally bloodshot during the day, while dark circles formed beneath them at night. Whenever he looked at T, she felt frightened and deeply unsettled. His temperament also became increasingly unpredictable. Whenever he was affectionate toward his wife during the day, something disturbing would happen that night involving their infant daughter. T believed that the person harming the baby was none other than her own father. She could not explain why this happened, but she believed the medium, or the supernatural forces she allegedly controlled, had somehow manipulated him into acting violently without awareness. According to T, after these episodes ended, her husband had no memory whatsoever of what had happened. Whenever she confronted him, he sincerely denied harming the baby and even believed that T herself had become irrational. Nor did the incidents end there. Whenever T asked her husband to buy necessities for their daughter or give her money to care for the household, she believed that their baby would once again experience unexplained distress later that same night. Whenever these incidents occurred, T was overwhelmed with grief and helplessness. She sought advice from relatives and trusted friends, desperately hoping someone could explain what was happening or show her a way to resolve it. Yet no one knew how to help. According to T, the disturbances continued. She believed that these unseen spiritual forces caused several accidents involving her family. Fortunately, although the incidents were frightening, neither she, her husband, nor their child suffered any serious physical injuries. What hurt T even more was that some people began accusing her of placing a curse on her own husband, claiming she was responsible for his increasingly irrational and erratic behavior. The situation eventually spread beyond her immediate family. Whenever T brought her daughter to visit her husband's relatives, she believed that the same unseen influences caused family members to mistreat the baby and pressure Trang and her child to leave the house. The same pattern, she said, occurred when she visited her own parents. T also noticed a strange recurring phenomenon. Whenever her husband or another relative stared intensely into the baby's eyes, the child would suddenly begin rubbing her eyes as though something had entered them, appearing to experience immediate discomfort. Even T's friendships gradually fell apart. She observed that people who spent time with her would unexpectedly become irritable, lose their tempers, or behave aggressively for no apparent reason. All of this, she reflected, had begun simply because she wanted to choose an auspicious wedding date. That single decision, she believed, ultimately plunged her entire extended family into chaos and emotional turmoil. Everything that happened seemed almost unbelievable, as though it belonged in a movie rather than real life. T found herself trapped. Whatever she did seemed to make matters worse. If she stayed close to her husband, she feared something would happen to her daughter. If she kept her distance from him, their marriage continued to fall apart. It was an agonizing dilemma. Eventually, the couple separated. T rented another home where she and her daughter could finally live in relative peace. After enduring so many painful experiences, T felt completely exhausted, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. She gradually came to believe that all of these hardships arose from the negative karma she herself had created in the past. Accepting this interpretation, she began sincerely repenting, reciting the Great Compassion Mantra, and praying that she might repay whatever karmic debts remained so that one day her family could reunite peacefully. Although she had become involved with a heterodox spiritual practitioner, T also believed she possessed an affinity with the Buddha's true teachings. She began practicing a repentance ritual for karmic creditors compiled by the author Court, together with regular recitation of the holy name of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, performing the practice with wholehearted sincerity and devotion. Then, one early morning before dawn, T had an extraordinary dream. In the dream, she believed she was blessed by the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who revealed to her events from one of her previous lives. Unlike ordinary dreams, everything felt exceptionally vivid and real. She found herself in a distant past life as the wife of a wealthy government official. While her husband was away fighting in a military campaign, she remained at home with several servants. Among them was a maidservant who secretly loved her master. Jealous of both the official's wife and the young child, the maid gradually developed deep resentment toward them. Whenever the lady entrusted the baby to the maid's care, the maid would secretly mistreat the child. Although the lady repeatedly discovered that the maid had harmed her son, she forgave her each time out of compassion and tolerance. On one occasion, however, She witnessed the maid placing the infant directly on a pile of sand while other people carelessly tossed sand over the baby's face and into his eyes without concern. Witnessing such cruelty with her own eyes, and realizing that the maid secretly desired her husband, the lady could no longer contain her anger. Consumed by overwhelming rage, she killed the maid on the spot. Within the dream, T suddenly recognized that the maid from that past life was the very same woman who, in her present life, had become the spirit medium. At that moment, T awoke. To her, the dream provided a complete explanation for all the suffering her family had endured. Nothing seemed arbitrary or unjust anymore. One reaps what one sows. Cause and effect, she concluded, always operate with perfect fairness. Because of the deep karmic bond between husband and wife accumulated over many lifetimes, T and her husband had been reunited again in this life. Likewise, the former maid had carried her unresolved attachment and resentment across lifetimes. According to T's interpretation, the woman continued to harbor feelings for her husband and jealousy toward T since T had killed the maid in that distant past life. The medium now carried that ancient resentment within her subconscious and, in this lifetime, sought revenge through the use of occult practices. Thus, T came to believe, the cycle of karmic cause and effect continued endlessly, each grievance giving rise to another, unless someone chose to awaken, let go of hatred, and break the cycle. According to the author, one of the greatest dangers of this age of the Dharma's decline is the widespread influence of heterodox teachings and deceptive spiritual practices, a phenomenon that Buddhist scriptures are said to have foretold. Such groups exploit people's fascination with deities, spirits, the unseen world, and, above all, the human tendencies toward greed, anger, and delusion. By appealing to these desires, they deceive others for personal gain, gradually leading people away from the Buddha's authentic teachings and into mistaken beliefs without their even realizing it. Ultimately, the author argues, it is our own greed, hatred, and delusion that create the conditions for such deception. People may seek quick wealth with little effort, attempt to possess another person's affection, try to force romantic relationships, compete with or harm others, or simply follow someone's advice blindly without understanding the consequences. These mental states, according to the Buddhist perspective presented here, make a person more vulnerable to manipulation. If one's mind is free from greed, hatred, and delusion, the author says, misleading influences have no foothold. For this reason, we should constantly observe our own minds, recognize the arising of these unwholesome states, and prevent them from gaining control. Whenever greed, anger, and ignorance dominate our thoughts, we are, in effect, opening the door for harmful influences to enter our lives. Mastering the mind is by no means easy. Nevertheless, we should patiently cultivate awareness day by day, continually transforming greed into generosity, anger into compassion, and delusion into wisdom. In Buddhist terminology, this means nurturing the four immeasurable qualities: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The author further cautions that even sincere Buddhists may unknowingly stray onto misguided paths. In today's world, many people claim to practice Buddhism in pursuit of liberation, yet the true motivation is often the desire for miraculous powers, supernatural experiences, wealth, success, or social status. Such desires, the author warns, can also be exploited by deceptive spiritual teachers or misleading practices, causing people to mistake them for the genuine Dharma. On the other hand, if one's sole aspiration is liberation from suffering, the attainment of Buddhahood, and the compassionate welfare of all beings, then heterodox teachings cannot easily mislead that person. According to the author, such teachings have no power to bring genuine liberation. At most, they keep beings revolving within the cycle of birth and death for even longer. Only the Buddha's authentic Dharma, the author concludes, can lead sentient beings beyond samsara and toward the peace and freedom of nirvana. Therefore, everyone, and Buddhists in particular, is encouraged to remain vigilant, cultivate wisdom, and avoid becoming entangled in these subtle nets of deception.